Hello, fourth grade, and welcome to lesson 12-4. In this lesson, we're going to focus on adding fractions that have denominators of 10 and 100. Let's go ahead and watch our short video, and then we can get into our notes and our guided practice together.
How can you add fractions with denominators of 10 and 100? Think about this question during the lesson. Jana and Steve collected money for an animal shelter. Jana collected 5/100ths of their goal, while Steve collected 4/10ths. How much of their goal did Jana and Steve collect? The red part of the diagram shows 4/10ths of the goal, and the blue shows 5/100ths of the goal. How can you find how much of their goal Jana and Steve have reached? The amount they collected can be written as 4/10ths plus 5/100ths. Add 4/10ths plus 5/100ths. Can you add the two fractions? No, you use like denominators to add fractions. The fractions do not have the same denominator.
Now remember, when we were talking about adding fractions before, we said our fractions have to be part of the same, have to have the same size pieces in order for us to do any work with them. So if we have 4/10 and 5 out of over 100, what can we do to give them the same denominator? Now I know to make 100, if I'm looking at 10, I can do 10 times 10. That can give me an equivalent fraction. But remember, when you do equivalent fractions, you have to make sure that what you do to the numerator, you also do to the denominator. So if I'm going to multiply by 10 to make this into 100, I also have to multiply my numerator, my 4 times 10, to make it 40. So 40 out of 100 is the same thing as saying 4 groups of tens, or tenths in this case. So over here it says drag 1/10 pieces and 1/100th pieces onto the hundredths grid to find 4/10ths plus 5/100ths. So here's 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, and 4/10. And now we need 5 out of 100. So those are going to be my small pieces. So 1/100th, 2/100ths, 3/100ths, 4/100ths, and then 5/100ths. So now you can see we have 4 groups of 10, so that's 40, and 5 individual little unit pieces out of the 100. So we have 45 out of 100 here.
You can use equivalent fractions to write tenths as hundredths. Rewrite 4/10ths as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. Multiply the numerator and denominator by 10. 4/10ths times 10/10ths equals 40/100ths. Now add the numerators and write the sum over the like denominator. What is the sum?
Select your answer.
Okay, now here, remember, when we're adding fractions, we keep the denominator the same. Remember, that's the one that we don't touch. Since they have the same denominator, it's still going to be out of the same total number. So we had 40 of the pieces, and then we had 5 more of the pieces. So altogether, we would have 45 out of those same 100 pieces. You do not add the denominator. The denominator always stays the same.
40/100ths plus 5/100ths equals 45/100ths. Jana and Steve have collected 45/100ths of their goal. Have they collected more or less than 1/2 of their goal?
Now, to answer this question, we have to stop and think. Half would be if we had the whole grid split into 2 equal parts. So if we have a 100 grid and we split it into 2 equal parts, that would mean we'd have 50 and then another group of 50, because half of 100 is 50, or 2 groups of 50 equals 100. So now we need to stop and think, is 45 greater than or less than 50?
They have collected less than 1/2 of their goal. 50 100ths would be 1/2 of their goal. Jana and Steve have only collected 45 100ths of their goal, and 45 100ths is less than 50 100ths. Now you know how to add fractions with denominators of 10 and 100.
Great job!
All right, let's go ahead and jump into our notes and our guided practice together. Now for our notes for lesson 12-4, adding fractions with denominators of 10 and 100, the question we're going to focus on is how can we add fractions that have a denominator of 10 and 100? So remember, when you add fractions, they must have like denominators. That means the denominator must be the same. If you want to add fractions with unlike denominators, first you must find an equivalent fraction that gives them the same denominator. So just like we did in the example in the video, we had to change one of our numbers and find an equivalent fraction that shared the same denominator. So for my first example over here, our question says, find the sum of 4/10ths plus 30 hundredths. So I need to stop and think, how can I add these fractions? Well, I need to give them a common or a like denominator first. And I can make 10 into 100, I know, by multiplying 10 times 10. So whatever I do to one number, one part of my fraction, I have to do to the other side of my fraction when I'm trying to find an equivalent. So 4/10ths plus 30 hundredths, I'm going to take the 4/10ths and multiply the top and the bottom, so my numerator and my denominator. I'm going to multiply those each by 10. So 4/10ths becomes 40 hundredths. And now I can add 40 hundredths to 30 hundredths because they share a common denominator now. Now, like we said with fractions, you leave the denominator alone. Once you've got a like denominator, you can ignore it and just drop it into your answer. All you're going to be adding and working with is your numerator. So 40 plus 30 is 70. So our answer is 70 hundredths. Now for our next example, it says the mural is divided into 100 equal parts. Marilyn's class painted 3/10ths of the mural, and Cal's class painted 27 hundredths of the mural. How much have the two classes painted? So over here, I drew my 100 grid, and I highlighted or I colored in 3 groups of tenths. And then I colored in 27 individual pieces out of the 100. So 3/10ths plus 27 100ths equals X. So I know that 3/10ths is 3 groups out of 10. So when I'm skip counting by groups of tenths. Now, in order to give it a like denominator so that it has the same denominator as the 27 hundredths, I know I can multiply 3/10ths numerator and denominator by 10. 3 times 10 is 30, 10 times 10 is 100. So an equivalent fraction for 3/10ths is 30 hundredths. So you see, all we did essentially was add a 0 onto the end of both of our numbers when we multiplied by 10. Now I can add my fractions. 30 hundredths plus 27 hundredths equals 57 hundredths, which tells us that they colored 57 hundredths of the mural altogether. And you can, if you want to skip count by tenths, you can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and then 7 more. So 57 out of the 100 total pieces available. Let's take a look at some more questions. So for this part, it says fill in the missing numbers in each question. And these are very similar, and a lot of them are pulled directly from some of the independent practice in your book. So it says 8/10ths plus 9 hundredths equals what over 100 plus 9 over 100? So we know the 9 hundredths is the same on both sides of this equation, right? We can see our equal sign here. The 9/10ths hasn't changed. The number that's going to change is the 8/10ths. So how can I make 8/10ths into a fraction that has a denominator of 100? Well, I can multiply my numerator and my denominator each by 10. And that's going to give me an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100. So 8 times 10, and then the 10 times 10 gives me 80 out of 100, plus 9 out of 100, which equals 89 out of 100, or 89 hundredths. For question B, it says 70 tenths plus 33 hundredths. So how do we give those a like denominator? Here we can see the 33 hundredths is the same on both sides. So the 70 tenths is what's going to change. How do I turn this into a fraction that has a denominator of 100? Same thing that I did before. I'll multiply my numerator and my denominator by 10. So now it becomes 700 hundredths, or 700 over 100, plus 33 over 100, which equals 733 over 100. Now, since this is what we call an improper fraction, where our numerator is bigger than our denominator, we're going to rewrite it as a mixed number. So how many hundreds are in 733? There's 7 hundredths. So I put the 7 on the outside. And then we have those 33 remaining pieces. So 7 and 33 hundredths. For part C, you can see that we're working with 3 fractions here, but we're still doing the exact same process. So don't feel overwhelmed just because there's more numbers. The process is exactly the same. 28 tenths plus 72 tenths plus 84 out of 100. Now, you could have done this a couple different ways. One of the ways is you could have added these two together and then changed it into a fraction that has a denominator of 100. Or you could do the way that we did it here, where we changed each one of these into a fraction that had a denominator of 100, and then we added them. So to give them a fraction, give these fractions a denominator of 100, we have to multiply the numerators and the denominators by 10. So 28 tenths, I multiply top and bottom by 10, and 72 tenths, again, multiply top and bottom by 10. And this one already has a denominator of 100. So 28 tenths became 280 hundredths, 72 tenths became 720 hundredths, plus 84 hundredths. So over here, I did them in parts. So I used my associative property to do some grouping. 280 plus 720 gave me 1,000, plus 84 gave me 1,084 out of 100. So how many 100s are in 1,000? We know there's 10 of them. So I pull out the 10 whole on the outside, and then I'm left with the 84 hundredths. So 10 and 84 hundredths is going to be my answer here. It looks like a lot of steps, but they're steps that are easy for you to do, and they're ones that you guys are familiar with. So please don't let it worry you if you see a lot of numbers. Take it one piece at a time. All right, next let's get into our guided practice. For number 1, it said 45 hundredths plus 25 hundredths equals how much? They were asking about the number of things that were collected to meet their goal on the question from the previous page. So 45 hundredths plus another 25 hundredths would mean they've collected 70 hundredths out of their goal. For number 2, 9 tenths plus 71 hundredths. So in order to give these a common denominator of 100, I'm going to multiply the 9 tenths times 10 for the numerator and denominator. So that gives me 90 hundredths instead of 9 tenths. So 90 hundredths plus the 71 hundredths equals 161 hundredths. And again, this is an improper fraction. So stop and think, how many groups of 100 are in 161? There's one whole group plus that 61 extra that's left over. So my answer here is going to be 1 61 hundredths. For number 3, we have 3 tenths plus 4 hundredths. Again, multiply numerator and denominator by 10. So my 3 tenths becomes 30 hundredths plus 4 hundredths equals 34 hundredths. For number 4, 71 hundredths plus 5 tenths. Again, multiply numerator and denominator by 10 to give a common denominator of 100. So 71 hundredths plus 50 hundredths. Remember, the denominator doesn't change once you have a common denominator. So you're just adding 71 plus 50 is 121. Now, since 121 is greater than 100, it's an improper fraction. So I'm going to think, how many groups of 100 are in 121? Well, I know there's one whole group, so I pull that one out. and then I'm left with the 21 remaining. So 1 and 21 hundredths. For number 5, we have 4 hundredths plus 38 tenths. Multiply numerator and denominator by 10 to give it a common denominator of 100. So 4 hundredths plus 380 hundredths equals 384 over 100. Remember, denominator doesn't change. We don't touch it. Then we're going to convert this from an improper fraction into a mixed number. So how many 100ths are in 384? Well, I know there's 3 of them. There's a 300, so I pull the 3 out and I'm left with the 84. So 3 and 84 out of 100. For number 6, we have 90 hundredths plus 1/10. So I'm going to add, or I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 10 before I do my adding. So 90 hundredths plus the 1/10 became 10 hundredths. So 90 hundredths plus 10 hundredths. We leave our denominator alone, we don't touch it, equals 100 over 100, which equals 1 whole. That means we have the whole grid colored in. For number 7, we have 8 tenths plus 1/10 plus 7 hundredths. So again, this is the same thing as we did earlier in the example. Just because we have 3 different add-ins, we have 3 different numbers that we're adding together, that doesn't make it more challenging. It's just an extra step. So I'm going to multiply my numerator and denominator each by 10 on both of these, or I could add them together first and then change it. Either way is fine. So 8 tenths becomes 80 hundredths. 1/10 becomes 10 hundredths plus the 7 hundredths. So 80 plus 10 is 90. 90 plus 7 is 97. And our denominator stays the same. We don't touch it. Okay, and now for number 8, we have the same setup that we had before. So we have 3 different fractions that we're adding, and we do not have like denominators. So we have 38 hundredths plus 4 tenths plus 2 tenths. So again, you can multiply numerators and denominators of the 1s over 10 by 10 to find equivalent fractions. So 4 tenths becomes 40 hundredths, 20 tenths becomes 20 hundredths, and then we already had the 38 hundredths. Now that we have a common denominator for all of them, we don't touch the denominator anymore. It stays as 100, and we only add our top numbers in the numerator. So I know 40 plus 20 is 60. So 38 plus 60 is going to give me 98. So the sum for 38 hundredths plus 4 tenths plus 2 tenths is going to be 98 hundredths. So remember, when you're working with these, you can either add these when you have 2 of them out of the 3 that have the same denominator. You can add those first and then change all of it to give it a common denominator, or you could do it individually like we did here, where you change each one of your add-ins first to make sure you have a common denominator that you're working with, and then you can just do the addition. Either way works fine. Just make sure that when you're adding and multiplying, you're doing it very carefully. All right, if you guys have any questions about this lesson, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, 4th grade. Take care. Bye-bye.